Charlie of the Rolling Stones died, and how does the Rolling Stones go on, and all that kind of stuff. But I thought, Jesus, like, you lost your buddy.
Yeah.
And you lost a buddy who's around your age.
Yeah, exactly.
How was that for you?
Well, it's very difficult to lose friends, you know. As you get older, you lose a lot of friends.
When Charlie Watts, a significant part of the Rolling Stones, passed away in August 2021, the world expected the band to be front and center at his funeral. But to everyone's surprise, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Ronnie Wood weren't there.
For a brief moment, I think Charlie wanted us to go on the road. He wanted the tour to happen. That's my feeling the last time I spoke to him.
At first glance, it seemed unthinkable. Because how could his closest bandmates of nearly 6 decades miss such a moment? The truth, however, wasn't neglect or disrespect. It was something far more complicated. So stay tuned as we unravel what really went down.
Charlie was a heartbeat for the band, you know, and also a very steady personality, you know, he's a very reliable person.
Rolling Stones hit their stride as global superstars. Formed in London in 1962, the Rolling Stones started as a small group of young men who wanted to put their own spin on rhythm and blues. Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Brian Jones, Bill Wyman, Charlie Watts, and later Ronnie Wood became the lineup that shaped what the world came to know as the greatest rock and roll band in the world. Their breakthrough didn't happen overnight, but once it came, there was no turning back. In the early 1960s, the Beatles were dominating the charts with a polished and friendly image. The Stones came in as their scrappier, edgier counterparts. They weren't trying to be the clean-cut boys next door. Instead, they leaned into raw energy, attitude, and blues-driven sounds. That difference gave them their own space in the industry. Their early hits like I Can't Get No Satisfaction and Painted Black weren't just catchy songs. They stood out as anthems of rebellion, frustration, and youthful edge. Through the 1970s, the Rolling Stones hit their stride as global superstars. Their tours grew massive. Their albums went multi-platinum, and they became synonymous with the rock and roll lifestyle. Albums like Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street are still considered some of the greatest rock records ever made. They pushed boundaries musically while also cultivating an image of excess, freedom, and controversy. Yet despite the chaos that surrounded them, their music consistently held the spotlight. Charlie Watts played a unique role in all of this. While Mick Jagger and Keith Richards were the flashy frontmen, Charlie was the steady anchor behind the drum kit. Unlike his bandmates, he wasn't known for wild antics or headline-grabbing scandals. Instead, he kept a low profile and let his drumming do the talking. His style wasn't about showing off, but about giving the songs a backbone. Fans and critics often said that, without Charlie, the Stones' music wouldn't have had the same pulse. He was a jazz-trained musician who brought subtlety and precision into a band that thrived on chaos, making him indispensable even if he rarely sought the spotlight. The band didn't just stay stuck in their golden years. They kept touring well into the 2000s and 2010s, long after many of their contemporaries had retired. Stadiums still filled up, proving that the Rolling Stones weren't just a band of the past. Instead, they were still a cultural force. From merchandise to documentaries to continued live performances, the Stones found ways to remain relevant across generations. Even as musical trends changed, their name carried weight. Then came 2021. Charlie Watts, who had been battling health issues, passed away at the age of 80. The news sent shockwaves across the music world, not only because he was such a central part of the Rolling Stones' identity, but also because of how the band responded afterward. When his funeral came around, fans noticed something striking. The other Stones, weren't there. For a band that built its legacy on sticking together through decades of highs and lows, their absence raised more questions than answers. Why did they stay away? The reason isn't as simple as it seems. The shocking death and funeral. In 2004, Watts had already faced a major crisis when he was diagnosed with throat cancer. The drummer, who was never one to crave the spotlight, kept it private while undergoing radiotherapy. His bandmates and close friends supported him quietly, and in time, he recovered. But his body had taken a toll from the fight, and though he returned to touring and performing, there was a fragility about him that wasn't there before. Fans, of course, saw the same composed, sharp-suited figure behind the kit, tapping out rhythms without flash or excess. But within the Stones' circle, there was an awareness that Watts was pushing himself. By the summer of 2021, those fears became reality again. At 80 years old, Charlie Watts underwent a medical procedure that forced him to step back from touring. The Rolling Stones were scheduled to resume their No Filter tour, but for the first time in decades, Watts wouldn't be with them. He released a statement in August 2021, saying with typical understatement that it was important he take the time to recover. He added his blessing for the Stones to go on with Steve Jordan, a drummer he himself had suggested as his stand-in. It was a simple gesture, but one that showed Watts's sense of responsibility. Even when he was unwell, he was thinking of the band, making sure they had someone he trusted. But the truth was far heavier than his public words let on. Charlie Watts never recovered from the surgery. On August 24, 2021, the Rolling Stones and the world lost the man who had kept time for more than half a century. He passed away in a London hospital surrounded by his family. The official statement from his publicist described him as one of the greatest drummers of his generation. For those who had followed his career, that was an understatement. Watts wasn't flashy, but he was the spine of the band. Without him, the Stones' music might never have carried the same strength and endurance. The news shocked fans worldwide. For decades, Charlie Watts had seemed like the unshakable constant in a group defined by turbulence. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards could clash. Members could come and go, but Watts had always been there, in his usual calm, precise, and loyal manner. Now, suddenly, that presence was gone. Tributes poured in, not only from the Stones' inner circle, but from musicians across genres. Paul McCartney recorded a video calling him a lovely guy and praising his drumming. Elton John described him as the ultimate drummer. Ringo Starr, the Beatles drummer, tweeted a simple but powerful message. God bless Charlie Watts. We're going to miss you. Yet in the middle of the flood of public grief, Charlie's family made a decision that would surprise many. Charlie Watts was laid to rest in September 2021 in Devon, England. The funeral was private and attended only by close family, a quiet ceremony, just the way Watts had lived his life. Unlike many rock stars, he never wanted a big show around personal matters, and his family respected that. His Rolling Stones bandmates, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Ronnie Wood, were not able to attend because of strict COVID-19 restrictions and their location in the US preparing for the No Filter tour. The Stones were devastated to miss the last chance to say goodbye in person, but they respected the family's wishes. Reports later made it clear that Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Ronnie Wood were heartbroken not to be there. Yet, they honored Charlie by carrying on with the tour just as he had wanted. Every night, they paid tribute to him on stage, with photos of Watts displayed and his memory spoken about before they played. Keith Richards even kept Charlie's drum kit set up during rehearsals, a silent reminder of his friend's presence. The funeral itself, according to those close to the family, was understated and simple. Just as Charlie lived his life, it wasn't about extravagance. It was about those who truly knew him, gathering quietly to mourn and celebrate the man behind the music. And perhaps that was fitting. While the Rolling Stones were a global phenomenon, Charlie Watts had always preferred the quieter side of life. When not touring, he spent most of his time at his farm in Devon with his wife Shirley, whom he had married in 1964 and remained with until his death. For him, fame was never the appeal. Music was his craft, but home was his refuge and a place where he found peace. Still, the private farewell left a gap not only for his bandmates, but also for millions of fans. There was a sense of unfinished goodbye, one that could only be filled by remembering his legacy on stage and on record. Mick Jagger said in interviews afterward that he would often find himself turning during shows, expecting to see Charlie behind him, only to be reminded he was gone. For Keith Richards, who had relied on Charlie's timing more than anyone, the absence was crushing. Richards once said that Watts was the engine of the Stones, and without him, the band felt like it had lost its anchor. But while his death marked the end of an era, Charlie Watts's story didn't start with fame or tragedy. It began with a love for jazz and an unexpected invitation that would change his life. Watts wasn't a rock and roll kid by nature, and while we ruminate on the death of such a treasure in the music space, let's take a glimpse into the legacy he left behind. The legacy left behind. Charles Robert Watts, better known to the world as Charlie Watts, was born on the 2nd of June, 1941 in Kingsbury, London, during one of the most turbulent periods in modern history. The Second World War was raging, and London had already endured the devastating Blitz. His parents, Charles Richard Watts and Lillian Charlotte Watts, were ordinary working-class people trying to make the best of life during hard times. His father worked as a lorry driver, and the family lived modestly. Charlie also had a sister, Linda. Growing up in post-war Britain shaped much of his early outlook. The Watts family moved to Wembley, a suburb of northwest London, where Charlie would spend most of his childhood. It was not an affluent area, but it was stable, and like many post-war families, the Watts household valued discipline, work, and education. From a young age, Charlie was quiet, thoughtful, and reserved, and this did not change till his death. Unlike many children who craved the spotlight, he was naturally shy. His interests gravitated toward drawing and music, though music did not dominate his life until a bit later. What set him apart early on was his ear for rhythm. As a boy, Charlie would tap on furniture, tabletops, or anything that could produce sound. Rhythm fascinated him. His parents noticed this habit, but encouraged it rather than scolding him. Charlie attended Tyler's Croft Secondary Modern School in Wembley, where he began to develop his talents. He was not a child prodigy in the traditional sense, but he was observant and quietly determined. He did reasonably well in school, though it was art and design that truly captured his imagination. His teachers recognized his gift for sketching, and he grew passionate about drawing and graphic design. At this point, it looked as though his future might be in the visual arts, not music. But music entered Charlie's life in a defining way during his teenage years. Around the age of 13, he heard jazz for the first time. It was Charlie Parker, the legendary saxophonist, who sparked something inside him. Parker's fluid, expressive style left a deep mark. Unlike the rock and roll that was beginning to sweep Britain at the time, jazz was sophisticated, complex, and intellectual. Charlie was drawn to it immediately. He didn't want to be a frontman or soloist. He just wanted to be part of the rhythm, the foundation of the sound. By his mid-teens, Charlie convinced his parents to buy him his first drum kit, which was second-hand and far from glamorous. But it was enough to begin his journey. He spent endless hours practicing in his bedroom, often playing along to jazz records. He admired drummers like Max Roach, Chico Hamilton, and Art Blakey, all of whom became his heroes. Despite his love for drumming, Charlie didn't abandon art. After finishing school, he went on to study at the Harrow School of Art, where he trained in graphic design. His studies reflected his natural inclination for precision and detail. These were the qualities that later defined his drumming style. He learned to blend structure with creativity, a lesson that applied both to design and to music. While studying art, Charlie began playing in local jazz bands around London. One of his early groups was the Joe Jones All-Stars, named after the drummer he admired. In these small clubs, Charlie built his reputation as a reliable and steady player. He wasn't the flashy drummer who liked to draw with solos. He preferred to focus on timing, consistency, and supporting the band. Other musicians loved playing with him because he made the music flow. In 1960, Watts was invited to join Alexis Korner's Blues Incorporated, one of the pioneering rhythm and blues bands in Britain. Korner was a central figure in the London blues scene, and his group became a hub for young musicians who would later form the backbone of British rock. This was a pivotal moment for Charlie. Though he loved jazz, the blues introduced him to a new kind of raw energy that was sweeping through Britain. At the time, Charlie was still working in graphic design during the day and playing music at night. He wasn't sure music could sustain him, and his personality wasn't that of a fame seeker. He was content designing by day and drumming by night. But his time with Korner's group connected him to the emerging scene of young rock and blues musicians who were about to change the world. One of those connections would be life-changing. Through the blues circuit, Charlie came into contact with Brian Jones, Mick Jagger, and Keith Richards, who were in the early stages of putting together a band. They had a vision to play American blues and rhythm and blues with their own British spin. But they needed a steady drummer to hold it together. At first, Charlie was reluctant. He enjoyed the music, but wasn't sure about committing fully. He still had his design career and wasn't eager to give it up for an uncertain future in a fledgling rock group. But Jagger, Richards, and Jones recognized his talent, and persistence eventually paid off. In January 1963, Charlie Watts agreed to join the Rolling Stones. His entry into the band marked the beginning of a seismic shift in music history. Unlike the others, who were flamboyant, ambitious, and full of raw energy, Charlie was calm, steady, and deliberate. He brought balance to the group, both musically and personally. His drumming style was straightforward but powerful, rooted in jazz rhythms but adaptable to blues and rock. He gave the Stones just the backbone they needed. Charlie's personality also stood in contrast to his bandmates. He was not drawn to the excesses of the rock and roll lifestyle. While others indulged in fame, parties, and the spotlight, Charlie chose live and almost invisible. He remained devoted to his wife, Shirley Ann Shepherd, whom he married in 1964 and stayed with for the rest of his life. Unlike many rock stars, Charlie preferred a quiet home life, often retreating to his house with Shirley and later their daughter, Serafina. His love for art never disappeared either. Even as the Rolling Stones grew into one of the biggest bands in the world, Charlie continued sketching. He often took just time to sketch out every hotel room he stayed in while touring, creating a kind of visual diary of life on the road. He also pursued projects outside of the Stones, forming his own jazz ensembles when time allowed, which gave him a chance to return to the music that first inspired him. But above all, it was his role in the Rolling Stones that defined his legacy. He wasn't the loudest member, nor the most flamboyant. But he was the anchor. Keith Richards once said that Charlie's drumming was the bedrock of the Stones, allowing the others to soar. His ability to blend discipline with creativity set him apart from countless other drummers of his era. Charlie Watts's journey from a modest upbringing in wartime London to the world's biggest stages was not the path of a typical rock star, but it was a legacy never to be forgotten. But how has Rolling Stones fared ever since his demise? Let's find out. Rolling Stones after Watts. When Charlie Watts passed away in August 2021, the Rolling Stones were shaken in a way they had never experienced before. His absence left a gap that could never be fully replaced. Yet, as history shows, the Stones are a band built on resilience, reinvention, and survival. What followed after his death became a new phase in their long career, both as a group and as individuals. Steve Jordan, a drummer who had previously worked with Keith Richards on solo projects, was brought in to step behind the kit. The first major test came with the rescheduled No Filter tour in late 2021. Many questioned if the Stones would cancel or retire after Watts's death, but instead, they pushed forward, partly because that's what Charlie would have wanted. Jagger himself noted that Watts had insisted the band continue touring, even if he couldn't join them. With Steve Jordan on drums, the Stones honored Charlie every night on stage, sometimes opening shows with video tributes. The reaction from fans was emotional. While people noticed the difference in energy without Watts, they also saw the band's determination to keep his spirit alive. By the end of the tour, the Stones had proven they could still perform, though Watts's absence could still be strongly felt. In 2023, the Stones surprised many by releasing a brand new studio album, Hackney Diamonds. This was their first album of original material in 18 years. Charlie Watts had recorded drum parts on at least 2 tracks before his death, which gave the project a special connection to him. The rest of the album featured Steve Jordan on drums. The release showed that even after losing such a critical member, the Stones were not ready to retire. Hackney Diamonds was well received, both critically and commercially, proving that the band still had a place in modern music. For fans, hearing Watts's drumming on a couple of tracks felt like a farewell gift. But what does life look like for the rest of the band members Watts left behind? Mick Jagger, now in his late 70s, has continued to live with the energy of someone half his age. Even after Charlie's passing, Jagger has shown no sign of slowing down. He remains the face of the Stones on stage, running and dancing across venues with the same charisma he's had since the 1960s. Personally, Jagger has focused on family life as much as possible. He welcomed a child in 2016 with his partner Melanie Hamrick, a former ballerina. Balancing fatherhood with being a global rock star in his 70s has been a unique chapter for him. Despite the grief over Watts, Jagger has made it clear that performing helps him process loss. In interviews, he acknowledged that going on tour shortly after Charlie's death wasn't easy, but he believed Watts would have wanted them to carry on. Jagger explained that the stage gave him a sense of routine and connection, something he needed to keep moving forward. He also spends a lot of time with his younger child, ensuring that fatherhood doesn't take a back seat despite his demanding career. Those close to him say he finds comfort in staying active, working on music, and even maintaining a healthy lifestyle, which is something he has been conscious of for decades. For Keith Richards, losing Charlie Watts was especially painful. Richards often said that Watts was the foundation of the Stones, the man he relied on to keep everything together. In his memoir, Richards once described how the band's rhythm section, himself on guitar and Watts on drums, was like the heartbeat of their music. After Watts's death, Richards found solace in his friendship with Steve Jordan, who stepped in as drummer. Richards and Jordan had worked together for decades in the Expensive Winos, Richards's solo band, which made the transition smoother. Still, Richards admitted in interviews that it felt strange performing without Charlie. He referred to him as the engine of the group. Beyond the Stones, Richards has maintained a relatively quiet life. Now, in his 80s, he spends much of his time with his family and occasionally reflects publicly on his decades-long career. Even though Richards has battled health issues in the past, he remains active, performing on tours and recording music. Friends and colleagues note that Richards has mellowed with age, focusing more on enjoying simple routines rather than the wild lifestyle he was once known for. He has spoken about how grateful he feels to still be able to play at such a high level, especially after years of living through challenges that could have cut his career short. Richards continues to stay musically engaged, working on projects whenever inspiration comes, and he often emphasizes the importance of keeping the Stones' legacy alive. Ronnie Wood, the youngest member of the Stones' core lineup, has also faced personal challenges in recent years, including a battle with cancer. Still, Wood continues to bring energy and humor to the band. After Charlie's death, Wood leaned on his family and his artistic passions. He is also a painter, and his artworks often depict the band and his life experiences. His love for visual art has provided him with a creative outlet beyond music, and exhibitions of his paintings have been well received. Wood publicly shared how much Watts meant to him, not just as a bandmate, but as a friend. He recalled how Watts was often the most grounded member of the group, someone who stayed out of the spotlight and avoided unnecessary drama. Since then, Wood has emphasized the importance of cherishing close relationships and living in the moment. He often credits his wife and young twins for helping him stay positive, especially through health battles he has faced in recent years. Although Bill Wyman, the Stones' longtime bassist, left the band in 1993, he remained close to Charlie Watts. Wyman attended private memorial events after Watts's death, and he later shared that he was deeply saddened by the loss. Interestingly, Wyman contributed to tracks on Hackney Diamonds as well, showing that Watts' memory brought even past members back into the fold for certain projects. The Rolling Stones have always been defined by survival. They outlasted rival bands from the 1960s, survived controversies, substance abuse, internal conflicts, and even the death of founding member Brian Jones in 1969. Yet Watts's passing was different. He wasn't just a founder. He was the quiet stability in a band full of wild personalities. Since his death, their shows and music carry a bittersweet quality. Every time Jagger introduces the band on stage, fans notice the absence of Charlie's name. Every time Richards looks to the back of the stage, there's no Watts to nod at. Yet, rather than stop, the Stones have chosen to carry his spirit forward. The family left behind. Charlie Watts's widow, Shirley, has stayed largely private since his passing, but she has been part of memorial activities and tributes. When Charlie Watts passed away in August 2021, the impact was felt most deeply by his family. He had been married to Shirley Ann Shepherd since 1964, one of the longest and most enduring marriages in rock music history. Unlike many of his contemporaries who lived chaotic personal lives, Watts had always prioritized stability at home. He and Shirley built a quiet life away from the limelight, raising their daughter Serafina, and later becoming grandparents. The family's privacy made his death all the more difficult, because the man they knew wasn't just the drummer of the Rolling Stones, but a devoted husband, father, and grandfather. Shirley, who shared nearly 6 decades of marriage with him, has lived with a rare perspective. She supported one of the most famous musicians in the world while staying almost entirely out of public attention. Their marriage survived long absences due to touring, the temptations of fame, and health struggles that Charlie faced. After his passing, Shirley was said to be surrounded by close friends and family, leaning on that same network of support that had carried her through years of life in the shadows of the rock world. Though she has remained largely private since then, those close to the family note that her focus has been on protecting her husband's legacy and ensuring that their daughter and granddaughter continue to feel connected to his memory. Serafina Watts, their only child, grew up far away from the excesses of rock and roll despite her father's fame. Now in her 50s, she has lived a relatively quiet life compared to many children of famous musicians. The loss of her father was not only personal, but also public, as tributes poured in from around the world. While the spotlight could have been overwhelming, she and her daughter Charlotte have largely chosen to grieve privately. Serafina has continued to protect her privacy, focusing on her family and work, rather than stepping into the constant media attention surrounding the Rolling Stones. She has acknowledged the respect shown to her father by fans and fellow musicians, but has refrained from becoming overly visible in the press. Charlotte, meanwhile, has also kept a low profile, preferring to support her family quietly rather than make public appearances. Both mother and daughter have emphasized moving forward with normal routines while honoring Charlie's memory in their personal ways. For them, privacy has been a shield and a way to cope, giving them space to process their grief outside the constant narrative of rock history. In the years since his death, the Watts family has not sought attention. Instead, they have maintained the private lifestyle Charlie valued so highly. Shirley continues to live in the home they shared, surrounded by memories of their decades together, while Serafina and Charlotte have moved forward quietly, honoring him in their own ways. Charlie's passion for horses, art, and family traditions has left a strong mark on them, and those interests remain a part of their lives today. Though the public sees the Rolling Stones continuing on stage, for his wife and daughter, the adjustment has been a very personal one. Fans and fellow musicians around the world also paid respects, showing just how widely respected Watts was. Life without Charlie meant no longer having the man who anchored their family. But they had found strength in the bond they share with each other. What do you think Charlie Watts' legacy means for the future of rock music and the generations of artists he inspired? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about the lives behind the legends. We'll see you in the next video.